Gentlemen, welcome to the CIER Brookings 2024 Joint Seminar on Geopolitics and the U.S. Policy, Perspectives of Taiwan and the United States. The joint seminar is hosted together by the Zhonghua Institution for Economic Research and the Brookings Institution. Before we begin, I would like to express our gratitude to all of you for taking the time to be here today. We truly appreciate your participation. Now, we are pleased to have the president of the Brookings Institution, Dr. Cecilia Elena Ross, to give us the opening speech. Please welcome President Ross.
Good afternoon. Before we dive into our discussion, is this on? We'll try that again. Good afternoon. Before we dive into our discussion, I want to express a heartfelt gratitude to President Lian and to Zhonghua Institution for Economic Research for hosting us today. It has been a true pleasure collaborating with your team on this event. It is wonderful to be here in Taipei. It's my very first time, and so I'm very excited to be here. And I look forward to a productive discussion. With that, Dr. Lian, I'm excited to begin our fireside chat after I believe you'll give some opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ross. Next, let us welcome the president of Zhonghua Institution for Economic Research, Dr. Xianming Lian, to give us opening speech. Please welcome President Lian.
Dr. Ross, all the distinguished from the Brookings Institute, all the participants of this seminar, good afternoon. On behalf of the Zhonghua Institute of Economic Research, it is my great honor to welcome all of you to the CIER Brookings 2024 Joint Seminar. Today's events mark another milestone in the long-standing partnership between the CIER and the Brookings Institute, one of the world's most renowned and influential think tanks. We gather here at a time of the significant geographic shift and the rapid technology advancement, development that brings both challenge and opportunity. In particular, President Trump is going to take over the office in January 20th. I think this event actually makes today's seminar title as Geopolitics and the U.S. Policy Perspective from Taiwan and United States, especially timely and relevant. For over 4 decades, the CIER has been a forefront of the economic policy research in Taiwan. Since our founding in 1981, we have remained committed to providing the sound evidence-based recommendation to the Taiwanese government while fostering engagement with the global academic and the policy community. And throughout those efforts, CIER has earned the reputation of the Taiwan leading think tank. This seminar exemplifies the CIER's vision of advancing the international collaboration and facilitating the exchange of ideas. Today, we are privileged to collaborate with the Brookings Institute, which has long provided unparalleled thought leaders in global issues. Under the leadership of the Dr. Cecilia Ross, Brookings continue to set a standard for the research excellency and the policy innovation. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Ross for joining us today, and also for a distinguished Brookings delegation, including the Vice President, Dr. Susan Maloney, Dr. Ryan Haas, Dr. Malaya Solis, and all other participants here. And today, in addition to the Dr. Ross' assessment on the President Trump's policy, we have two other panels. The panel one will focus on geopolitics and the U.S. policy, and the second one will focus on technology and economic security. These two panels highlight the multifacet of the President Trump's policy and the need for comprehensive strategy to navigate the economic and geopolitical uncertainty. The insight from our esteemed panelists will be invaluable for the policymakers, academics, and the industry leader as we work to address the challenging and the rapidly evolving global landscape. Finally, I hope that today's seminar will inspire the fresh idea, deepen the mutual understanding, and pave the way for the further collaboration between the CIER and Brookings Institute. And I look forward to today's discussion, and I hope all the participants can learn from the seminar and also to share your idea with us. Thank you. Thank you all for coming today.
Thank you, Dr. Lian. Now it is time for the group photo. We would like to invite our speakers and honored guests to join us on stage for a group photo. Dr. Cecilia Elena Ross, President of the Brookings Institution. Dr. Xieming Lian, President of CIER, 中经院联协明院长. Dr. Suzanne Maloney, Vice President of Brookings Institution. Mr. John Deng, former Minister and Chief Trade Representative, 邓正中前政务委员. Director Ryan Hess, Director from Brookings Institution. Professor Sing He from 淡江 University, 淡江大学何思因教授. Director Maria Solis from Brookings Institution. Dr. 健全王, Vice President of CIER, 中经院王健全副院长. Mr. Terry Cao, Global Chief Marketing Officer and President of Taiwan SME, 国际半导体产业协会曹世伦总裁. Dr. 信宏成, Vice President of CIER, 中经院陈信宏副院长. Thank you. Thanks to all of our honored guests. The seminar today will begin with a fireside chat. We are glad to have two outstanding scholars who will engage in a thoughtful and inspiring conversation and share their insights with us from their professional fields. So I think our staff may need some time to set up on stage, so please bear with us. Now, let us welcome Dr. Cecilia Elena Ross, the President of the Brookings Institution, and Dr. Xieming Lian, the President of Zhonghua Institution for Economic Research. Dr. Ross, Dr. Lian, please. Thank
They are very Okay.
Okay.
So let me just take a very short time. We want the Dr. Cecilia Ross to talk with us more, but she has a very, very long CV. And Cecilia Ross is president of the Brookings Institute, and from 2021 to 2003, and she served the chair of the Council of the Economics Advisor. She's the first black woman to fit in the role of the CIER's 75-year history. And before that, she was dean of the Princeton School of the Public the International Affairs from 2012 to 2024. And she is a University Kesman and Ernst professor in economics and education, and professor of the economics and the public affairs. And really? I just want to mention that she's a labor economist by training, and I'm really delighted because I'm a health economist. So I'm very, very pleased to have someone like her to be able to speak at today's events. So why don't we skip all the CV, we can start the discussion. So I know that a lot of you are really interested to understand what particularly the insider views about the President Trump's policy. But let's start by asking Dr. Ross how is the United States economy so far, and in particular, how is the labor market doing, and what is your assessment about the current development, and is it consistent with the policy that you think, the direction that you think the policy makes wants?
Terrific. Well, thank you very much. And as I said before, it's really a pleasure to be here. So I think it's important to actually start with our understanding of the U.S. economy right now, because as I'm sure, undoubtedly, will transfer into trying to be a President-elect Trump reader and try to forecast what he might do, which will be based, I can already preview, will be based on what he said during his campaign. I think it's important to keep the context of the U.S. economy in mind right now, because for many economists, we think of that as the baseline, and we assess the impact of what at least he was speaking about on the campaign relative to where we are today. So I think that the U.S. economy is remarkably strong right now. And as chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, advising President Biden through the pandemic, in 2021 and 2022, many people thought that in order to address the inflation that we were having for the first time in decades, that the U.S. economy would need to have a period of recession in order to bring down the inflation. And that is not what we've had. In contrast, in our last reading on the labor market, for example, which was just last week, it was last week, but it reflected last month, so November. Those data are relatively lagged. The U.S. economy added about 227,000 jobs, which is in the range of employment growth that you would need in order to keep up with labor force participation and keep the unemployment rate rather low. So that is a number that is consistent with an economy that is, to use a technical term, humming along, and is the kind of cooling. We had a very hot labor market as we were going through the pandemic. We had job openings that were almost twice the number of people looking for jobs. We had a very high unemployment rate, very low unemployment rate, let me get the sign right there, had a very low unemployment rate. And so this suggests we have a labor market which is nicely cooling, which is exactly what the Federal Reserve has been looking for. And all the while, this has happened while our labor force participation has been relatively strong as well. At some level, this isn't a surprise. We've also had GDP growth that came in at the third quarter of 2024, where we are now, at about 3%. It was just under 3%. So the average for the last 3 years has been about 2.7%, which was the same as the 3-year average right before the pandemic. So we have relative GDP growth. So we have some, relatively strong, I don't want to call it strong, but we have robust economic activity. And we've also seen some sustained labor market productivity, labor productivity increases as well, which is what you need to have actually sustainable growth that's not just going to be inflationary in some other way. So we think that the U.S. economy is actually doing relatively well. And, this is actually, we've been doing better than many of our peers. Now, of course, we've also had a period of inflation. And the inflation has not quite gotten down to the level that the Federal Reserve is looking for, which is 2%. So our Federal Reserve Board met yesterday, and they cut rates by another 1/4 percentage point. But they also signaled, which sent our stock market in a little bit of a tailspin, they also signaled that they would only be cutting rates 2 times or so next year. So what this signals is that they felt confident that they are seeing our economy, that the inflation has been continuing to come down without having really adverse impacts on the labor market. But what they're signaling is that there's some uncertainty on the horizon, which I think actually is somewhat tied to our upcoming administration transition, as well as geopolitics around the world, et cetera. So inflation, and furthermore, I should say, inflation has sort of stagnated just above 2%. Housing inflation in the United States has been rather stubborn. Inflation in services has generally been stubborn. So, in general, what we believe is that inflation will come down. It will continue to be a bumpy path, which is, again, why the Federal Reserve is being cautious. So that's the state of the U.S. economy as we face this transition in administrations.
So that's an update. So I think it can reassure a lot of people's minds that the U.S. economy continues to be robust and inflation seems to be still under control. But I think the other participants are particularly interesting is the President-elect Trump's agenda. So the problem for us, for the CIR is it's very difficult for us to anticipate or expect what would be his primary priority for his agenda. We have to, I just joke to the Sicilian, we have to just watch, continue to read the True Social to understand what the policy he goes. So as an insider, could you just give us a little bit of insider over the Washington.
From Brookings, which is not on the inside of the White House, just to be clear.
Yeah. So as a leader of the think tank, can you give us your personal assessment about what kind of or what type of the policy proposal that you think the President-elect Trump is most committed to, and which you think on the priority that he is going to implement at first?
So when I was chair of the CEA, I was known, we had a period of inflation and we were coming out of the pandemic and everybody wanted to know what's the forecast, where are we going, where's the economy, what's going to happen? And I was famous for saying my crystal ball is rather cloudy. And my staff gave me a cloudy crystal ball as a going away gift. My crystal ball remains rather cloudy, I will say that. But what I can speak to is economic priorities. We have 2 other panels coming up, and I hope you will ask my colleagues what they have to think about what we might anticipate for the incoming administration on other dimensions. But on the economic agenda, I think that there are essentially four planks that I'm looking at. The first, and this will be one of the first sort of decisions or policy decisions the administration will need to address, which is the expiring provisions of the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which was President Trump's signature tax bill. And there was one provision which was lowering the corporate tax rate to 21%, was permanent at the time, but there were several other provisions that will expire this coming year. Reducing individual and business taxes, so what's tucked in there is President Trump would actually like to lower the corporate tax rate even lower to as low as 15% for domestic manufacturers. As you are all well aware, he spoke about increasing tariffs. And finally, he would like to address immigration. And I'm happy to talk about any or all of those.
Sure. I think that you mentioned about the extension of the Tax Cut and the Job Act, and also about the increase of the tariff. I think that particularly for the Taiwanese audience, they are especially interesting to understand whether the 20% of the increase is going to be for real, and because it's going to cover pretty much every country, including the Taiwan.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I think the Taiwanese audience is especially interested to understand whether the ICT goods are going to be included in this kind of the tax increase, and whether it's going to affect the supply chain of the Taiwanese company, which already built up a lot of the factory in Mexico and so on.
Right. Yeah. So I think that we don't know. Right, there were many people, so just to make sure everybody's on the same page, what President Trump committed to was tariffs of nearly 20% on nearly all imported goods, which for the United States is many goods, with even higher 25% tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico, and tariffs on some Chinese goods exceeding 60%. Okay, so if enacted, so I'm going to look at it from the American perspective first. We know that would be very costly for Americans. It would obviously provide a source of revenue for President Trump, President-elect Trump, which he will need to address the tax cuts, which we should come back to, because that's going to be one of the first things he has to do, and it's very expensive for the U.S. But the Tax Policy Center estimates that the policies will cost, the tariffs will cost the average American about $3,000 per year. I want to highlight that because not only does that mean, inflation, it looks stable. It's been sort of flat for the last 3 months, but it's still not down to 2%. And there are some people who are concerned that it could still re-accelerate. So what these tariffs would do is increase prices even more, right? So that is going to be one headwind that President Trump is very aware of. Americans will not be happy to be paying more for their imported goods. And as you just pointed out with the supply chain, it is not only on the final goods, but if there are parts of the supply chain, it can sneak its way up. Many supporters for President Trump was saying at the time, because he came out so early with the specifics, that it was a bargaining chip. And what that means is that he's using it to signal that this is going, that, there's a new sheriff in town and he's going to be tough. Yeah. And that if you want to, this is economic statecraft, right? If you want to negotiate or play ball with President-elect Trump, you need to talk on these terms. So we had Canada's, Prime Minister fly down to Mar-a-Lago very quickly in order to start negotiating. So what that means is he can say that there's a tariff of 25%, and then there's many carve-outs. So what we don't know is, first of all, do they go with these levels? And the second part is on really what will it apply? Because of the last time he issued a bunch of tariffs, there were complaints in many sectors, and he ended up making carve-outs in different places. So I think that's the place where the crystal ball, we expect there's going to be some movement on tariffs because he promised that and he committed to that. I think the part to watch is what's the effective tax rate actually? So who is it, where are their carve-outs? And that I don't have a good sense. My colleagues maybe have a better sense. That's the part that I think he's negotiating right now. And so I think we're going to have to wait and see when he actually takes office where it actually lands.
Okay.
Can I make one more point on
Sure.
tariffs? Which is that his economic team looks to me like they're lining up to be split. And again, my colleagues may have more to say on this. So you have the nominated Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent. You have Kevin Hassett, who is really the quarterback for the economic policymaking in the White House as director of the National Economic Council. Kevin Hassett, who was former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, they understand the potential costs of these tariffs on the economy. At the same time, he has his former trade representative, Lighthizer, who will be a special advisor within the White House. Now, for those of you who may not read personnel within the White House, presidential advisors do not have statutorily determined portfolios, but they are right close to the president in the West Wing. Oh. And so they can be the last person in the room, or they can catch the president at odd hours. So they can be people who have a lot of influence on the president. And then Lighthizer's former chief of staff at USTR, the trade representative, has been nominated to be the representative to USTR. So they may be more hawkish and more pro-tariff as a tool of economic statecraft, but at the same time, other members of the team, I don't know so much, including Marco Rubio, who's been nominated to be Secretary of State. So I think the team looks a little like there's going to be some interesting meetings that we have before us. And we'll have to see where that all lands.
Yes, I totally agree. And let me ask one more question regarding the tariff, and then let me go back to the individual and the business tax. The other parts that the President Trump has said many times he is going to increase, particularly for the goods from China, to 60%. Yes. I know that's a little bit out of line, but what do you think about, do you think he's going to, at least to put a differential treatment on the goods from China, and to, or that he's going to this time to actually to put a tariff actually the same without any difference for any goods to the United States?
This is what it's hard to judge. And we already see other countries starting to gear up and to prepare. There's retaliation. We already see President Xi starting to line up and to be responding. So, the fact that this is not a surprise, right? People have seen that President-elect Trump, what do we call him? President Trump 2.0 did this as President Trump 1.0. So we know it's credible that he wants to do something. But they also know that he's somebody who likes to negotiate, and they are gearing up in order to have a response. So this is why crystal balls need to remain kind of cloudy. And I would just argue that if somebody tells you they know what's going to happen, I would discount it by at least half, because I think we have to see really what happens on January 20th. And who gets actually confirmed. Not everybody will get confirmed. Not everybody has to be confirmed. And we'll have to see what President Trump judges the economic situation, judges his leverage to be. And I think we still have another 4 or 6 weeks before we will know where we are.
Okay. So let me get back to the individual business tax. I think that's a part which we know that President Trump in his first term, he has pushed very, very hard to reduce the tax. And he promised to continue to extend the tax benefit. But what do you think about the impact of this one? Because I know that there have been, particularly after the pandemic, there have been some widened inequality among the different income percentile. What do you think about the impact of this policy?
Well, so I think this is an important piece of his economic agenda. It was an important part of his legacy in the first term, and he would like to extend, and he would like to preserve it and make it more aggressive in terms of reducing the taxes. So the Congressional Budget Office, and I have the numbers here, estimates that the combined value of extending all of the provisions of the 2017 tax bill, and now we also have to sort of consider the increased interest payments, because we have higher interest rates, would cost between about $4.5 trillion. It would add $4.5 trillion to the federal debt over the next 10 years. That is on top of the fact that we have a fairly large federal debt, partially because it's estimated that the original version, so since the 2017 bill was passed, it was projected to have increased the federal debt by between $1 and $2 trillion since 2018. So, there are some economists that believe that these tax cuts should pay for themselves. What at least the congressional, who estimated this? I'm not sure, whether it was CBO or the Tax Policy Center. These are estimates suggesting that these tax cuts did not actually pay for themselves, that they were actually a form of stimulus, right? So this is the federal government putting more economic activity into our economy by $1 to $2 trillion since 2018. So the provisions that are expiring are lower marginal tax rates. So then there are parts of increased exemption and higher exemption phase out for the alternative minimum tax. That is, if your tax bill is too low, the federal government says, okay, you've managed to have enough exemptions or deductions, et cetera, we're going to make you pay a certain amount anyway. And so for higher income people who have very good accountants, they don't really love the alternative minimum tax, and then doubling the standard deduction. So those are the pieces that he would like to extend. And then, as I mentioned before, he would like to lower the corporate tax rate down to 15% for domestic manufacturers. So all of this is really quite costly, and the economists who've studied this have not actually found, not only can you see it in the tax revenues, but they have not actually found that it's generated the kind of business investment that was at least forecasted to present, to have generated when they passed the bill to begin with. So all of this is very costly to an economy that has got a federal debt that is historically high for us. And it's not clear how President Trump plans to pay for it. As a result, this may be an additional form of stimulus to our economy. We started with the fact that our basic economic situation is very strong, but that inflation is not fully down to 2%. If we're adding more fiscal stimulus to our economy, that has the potential to re-accelerate inflation, which means that the Federal Reserve will be trying to combat this inflation with higher interest rates, which is going to make all of this borrowing that much more expensive. So the Congressional Budget Office is anticipating that this will increase our federal debt substantially over the next 10 years. And it's an uncomfortable place for us to be, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But it causes a big challenge for President-elect Trump. It's partially why Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy heading up this new Department of Government Efficiency is one potential way to start to find ways to address this.
Yes, we are going to get to that point. But before that, let me just ask you another very important policy of the President Trump that is the plan to massively deportation of the undocumented immigrants. The size is unheard of. Now I think the last time I saw the number is about 11 million of the undocumented immigrants in the United States. And you are a labor economist, and so what do you think about the possibility that he is really be able to do that, and what will be the consequence for this kind of deportation, and how do you think is going to affect to have an impact on the U.S. economy?
Yeah, this again was a signature piece of President-elect Trump's campaign. I think he has very much emphasized and understood that immigration, and while the United States was founded on immigrants and we mostly at our foundation believe in immigrants, having a comprehensive immigration policy, we have an immigration system that is in need of reform. We have backlogs of people to get green cards and permanent residency. It can be very difficult for people to find legal paths for immigration. We rely on many of those 11, as of 2022, it was estimated about 11 million undocumented workers or people in the United States. Many of them are actually working in critical sectors of the United States, such as agriculture. They're cooks in our restaurant. They're providing childcare. They're providing elder care. So they're actually providing important pieces of our labor market. In fact, that's part of the reason why we've had this kind of soft landing from the inflation, which is our economy has continued to grow, and that some of that is because our labor force has continued to grow. And some of our colleagues at Brookings and elsewhere have documented that some of that is because of immigration. So the U.S. economy relies on immigration. We have an increasing dependency ratio. I think that's familiar here in Taiwan. And immigration provides a path forward, but our immigration system needs to be reformed. We need to have legal pathways for those, both low-skilled workers, and we know that high-skilled workers provide a lot of innovation, and they're very important to addressing a lot of our challenges. So all of that said, so immigration is a political challenge. President Trump managed to tap into that. But you also asked how realistic is it that he will be able to actually deport 11 million people. And I think even listening to former members of his team from the first term, they would say, look, he's not going to get to 11 million people. He's going to start with those who have criminal histories and are, even by under current law, should be deported. They're going to be harder to find. It's not like they're walking around with signs that say, you know, illegal, undocumented person, and I've been convicted of a crime and found guilty, and so deport me now, right? They don't have signs. They have to find them. And so what they emphasize is that, and they also emphasize that President-elect Trump will have to prioritize. This applies to his entire economic agenda, but it will also apply to how he executes on this campaign promise of dealing with undocumented workers. And so he's going to have to prioritize. I think it's estimated somewhere around 1 million or so are in this, convicted criminal category. I think that's where he'll go first. But it'll be harder to find them than I think it sounds as a soundbite. I think a bigger challenge that we face is that it can also be chilling for those who actually are here legally. And so because, again, people don't wear signs in the United States that say I'm documented or I have I'm here legally. So will there be some kind of statistical discrimination, as we would say in economics? People get confused and people get caught up in the system when they're here legally, but then it's going to be costly. And so do people stay home? They're not going to work. They're not spending money, which is all part of our economic activity. And so I think that is the bigger concern. We need to face our immigration, but this probably is going to be a brute force way. That said, so one estimate by economists at the Peterson Institute is that President Trump's campaign promise of immigration enforcement could lower U.S. GDP growth by 1.2 to 7.4%, at least compared to the baseline. And so poignantly, this could offset any other economic growth over the next 4 years. So again, I want to go back to where we are. President-elect Trump is inheriting a relatively strong economy. But this is one of several campaign promises which are part of which are adding to the uncertainty as to whether we'll be able to maintain it, because we need these immigrants, documented, undocumented. I'm not trying to argue for undocumented immigration, but we know that immigrants as a category are very important to the U.S. economy. We know that tariffs provide headwinds. We know that extending these tax cuts is going to be costly, and so he's adding much uncertainty to our economic future.
I totally agree with you. That's, I think, the challenge actually CIR actually face. Nowadays that we are not quite sure, for example, like you said about like 1 million documented immigrants. So let's just say that within the 1 million, how much or how many of them do you think is able to be find and deport? What is going to have the impact? Is it going to be, say, like 500,000 that you think is going to be complete? Because if I recall correctly, in his first term, end up less than 250,000 people being deported. So sometimes I'm not quite sure that whether it's going to be fully implemented or it's going to be partially implemented, and that's I guess that's the challenge that we face.
That's exactly right. So I think it's almost impossible for him to get to 11 million. And I think I agree with you. I think even getting to 1 million or 2 million is going to be extremely difficult. It will not happen overnight. How far does he actually get? He will have to prioritize. And so this is where he really wants to spend all of his resources, time and resources.
So I want to actually to move to another, I think a lot of people are interested. It's about the Elon Musk, the role here, and also about the government efficiency.
Yep.
And you having the chair of the CER and CA, what do you think about the possibility actually to be able to make the government more efficient, being as a chair for so many years?
Look, this is not the first time a president has come in. Vice President Gore was also tasked with generating more efficiency in the federal government. And there's no question that we have too many regulations in many places, that there's some inefficiency there. I think the challenge is, especially if you haven't been on the inside, to actually know what is actually a challenge and what is just hard work that the federal government does can be hard to see without having a better, more nuanced understanding of what the federal government does. And here's just one example. So Elon Musk has said that he can find more than $2 trillion worth of savings in the federal government budget. Now here's the problem. Discretionary spending, which is the spending that is that has to be voted on each year. So that is when there's negotiations each year over the budget, it's largely over the discretionary spending. That only comprises a quarter of the federal budget. So he can cut all of the discretionary spending and still not really achieve the kind of discretionary spending savings that he would like. And discretionary spending includes outlays for defense and transportation education. So he's already said he wants to take aim the Department of Education, but that also provides a lot of, services and funding that will be hard for him to cut. For example, Pell Grants, partially mandatory, partially discretionary. Many students in predominantly Republican states and counties are the recipients of Pell Grants. And so it's going to be very difficult for him to just cut out the federal government spending on Pell Grants. And when we look at our elementary and secondary school spending, that is largely a state and local expenditure in the United States. The federal government only accounts for 7 or 8% of the spending at the K through 12 level. So he's not going to wring a lot of savings out of cutting the Department of Education, and it will just get reallocated to a different department. So this is to say that really, if you want to address the federal outlays, you need to be dealing with our mandatory expenditures. So that's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. So that is Medicaid is for our lower income individuals. Yes. The other two are for older individuals. As our society is aging, those are becoming more expensive. We need serious reform there. Neither party was willing to talk about that during the campaign, because who wants to talk about cutting something that everybody believes that they're entitled to and have been spending into? It's like, political death wish. But we do know that we have to address that if we're really going to address the federal budget. That, and we need to be increasing revenues, which is sort of the opposite of what President Trump has set out to do. So I think it's going to be very challenging for them. I think they will talk a good game. They have talked about cutting the NIH, the National Institutes for Health. Well, we have a lot of good, important, basic research that happens at NIH. There's a lot of, that's how we got through the pandemic. That was where we got the original funding for the vaccines that got us through COVID. We can talk about cutting NIH, but the private sector is not going to be able to step in and actually, play the role of the federal government. So they will talk a good game. Now, the other thing is that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are outside the government, so they don't have any official capacity. Now, the House Republicans and probably some senators will pick up pieces of what they recommend. President-elect Trump's margins in the House are very thin. They're very thin. Somebody is sick, home for a wedding, just has someplace else to be for the week, and he won't be able to get the votes to pass. And so, and the Senate is not that much bigger. And so it's not like he can actually be proposing really radical changes because, again, Americans benefit in both Republican and Democratic states and counties.
Okay, so I probably have only 5 minutes left. I want to ask you some question which as an economist, I'm very interested because I know that you probably have heard about the debate of the AI, particularly AI on productivity, AI on education, and Acemoglu recently published a paper which claimed that the productivity gain is over estimated. And Taiwan happened to be, at least in the past few years, the growth actually depends on a lot on AI chip and AI server. So I think a lot of the audience, they would be really interesting to hear what do you think as the chair of the CEA. What do you think about the AI? Do you think it's going to continue to be supported, or do you think it's just a bubble and that Taiwanese government should be very, very cautious about this one?
Did I mention my crystal ball? So I think there's no question. We've been through periods of innovation. I once heard a chancellor or whatever at Oxford talk about, we've been around since the invention of the printing press. And we survived the invention of the printing press, right? So in the history of the world, we have had major innovations. Electricity was another major invention. The internet has been one, and AI is the next, looks to be the next one. So if you ask me, we have this new technology, which we are still trying to understand. And if you look at economic expectations about what will do to productivity, Daron Acemoglu is at one end, and then at the other end you have, admittedly, technology companies that are very interested, and they have an incentive to argue that it's going to be very big, that argue could be big. I think we don't know. When you have estimates that are that wide, we don't know. It's that new, but it's clear that it's here. Whether I'm a labor economist, I'm really interested in the impacts on workers. And so, AI is not one thing. So we don't want to just sort of put it in one box and, it's only going to replace workers or it's only going to work with workers, be complementary. We know that there's going to be, different flavors and in different situations. But just as we've adapted to other kinds of technological change, I would expect that to happen here. I do think it's important that we work very hard for these innovations to be more complementary with all kinds of labor. I think it will not be helpful to have workers who are completely displaced and do not see a role for themselves in our societies. We've seen some of that in the United States with some of the technological change and quite frankly, even globalization. And so we have, pockets of the United States where we have opioid crises, what my colleagues Ann Case and Angus Dietman called deaths of despair. It's not healthy for societies to have that either. So we need to find a way to harness these technologies to be increasing productivity. But I think we don't know, I think is the bottom line. So, my advice is to diversify, because that is what most economists would argue is the right way to withstand against some uncertainty.
Yes, of course, that's a very good suggestion. I think we are almost time. So why don't you just, do you want 1 or 2 minutes to summarize or to say a few last words?
So, this is an exciting time. I personally believe that this is a moment that is an opportunity for Brookings. Brookings is a nonpartisan think tank where we have, as Suzanne Maloney likes to say, we've had people who've gone into every administration since FDR, and we benefit from people coming out of it and coming out of administrations, and we have an interchange. Our whole mission is to provide evidence and to get those insights and evidence and our research to decision makers, and we will continue to do that even with the changing of the guard in Washington, D.C. And some of that is coming abroad and speaking with all of you and having exchange with all of you. So we learn from you. I've learned a tremendous amount, but more importantly, my colleagues have. And we will also take back your insights to our decision makers in Washington, and we hope we're able to bring some to you as well. So that is what we do. And I think it's all the more important in these times. But this is an exciting time for Brookings, and it's certainly a time of change for the world.
Thank you. And let's give a big hands to the president of the Brookings, Sally Ross.
Thank you so much, President Ross and President Lian. A special thanks to President Ross for sharing your valuable insights with us. I'm sure the audience has gained a lot of meaningful perspectives from your conversation. Please give a round of applause again to our two presidents. Now, let's begin panel 1, Geopolitics and the U.S. Foreign Policy. The moderator of panel 1 is Dr. Suzanne Maloney, the Vice President and the Director of Foreign Policy of the Brookings Institution. Our first panelist is Mr. Ryan Hess. He is the Director of the Thornton China Center and Co-Chair in Taiwan Studies of the Brookings Institution. And the second panelist is Dr. Siying He. He is the Adjunct Professor of the Graduate Institute of International Affairs and Strategic Studies of Danjiang University. I will give the floor to Vice President Maloney. Dr. Maloney, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just delighted to be here. And I'd like to express my gratitude to Zhonghua Institute for Economic Research for hosting the Brookings delegation here today and for collaborating on what I know has already been a wonderful discussion. I'm delighted to moderate today's panel on geopolitics and U.S. foreign policy. It's fitting to have such a conversation here in Taiwan. Taiwan is vital both to geopolitics, to geoeconomics, and to U.S. foreign policy as well. It is both the beating heart of the global economy and a critical enabler of peace and security in East Asia. Taiwan is also America's 8th largest trading partner and one of its closest friends in the world. I'm honored to be here on stage with two extraordinary experts who will help us think through changes in geopolitics and U.S. foreign policy that may lie ahead. Let me introduce them very, very briefly, as they both have incredibly distinguished careers and very long biographies. To my immediate left is Ryan Haas. He is the director of the John L. Thornton China Center and the Gu Chair in Taiwan Studies at the Brookings Institution. To his immediate left is Dr. Zhu Yin Hu. He is adjunct professor of the Graduate School of International Affairs and Strategic Studies at Tam Kang University here in Taiwan. What they both have in common is that they have both held very important positions in the respective national security councils of their governments in the past. Ryan is director for China, Taiwan, and Mongolia from 2013 to 2017 at the National Security Council in Washington. And Dr. Ho is Deputy Secretary General of the National Security Council here in Taiwan from 2008 to 2010. I know that we're going to learn a lot from their insights here today, and I'd ask them both to make a few opening remarks. I will then engage them in conversation, and I know that we'll learn an awful lot from this discussion. So over to you, Ryan, first.
Really wonderful to be with you all. Thank you for being here on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I come from Seattle, so I'm very comfortable in this weather, but it's great nonetheless. I have a confession to make at the outset, which is that I came here primarily to listen to Dr. Ho, whose thinking I've admired for a long time. So I'm going to be deliberately brief with my opening comments in hopes that you'll pose all the hard questions to him. But my task is to provide a perspective from the United States on geopolitics and U.S. foreign policy, how it's going to evolve. And I'm going to try to approach this as an analyst and not an advocate to provide as clear of a sense as I can of where things are going. And when I sit back and think about the change that is underway in Washington right now and in the geopolitical environment, I think that President Trump has a few core beliefs. One of the core beliefs is that the world is at a more unstable place than it has been at any point since World War II. There's war in Ukraine, there's war in the Middle East, the rules-based international order as we've known it is eroding, North Korea is emboldened, and there's a lot of conversation about a axis of upheaval involving Iran, North Korea, Russia, and China. And President Trump has a few explanations for what is going on. The first is that his critique of President Biden is that President Biden was too weak, too predictable, and too afraid of escalation. And that the world, frankly, has moved beyond the idea of a rules-based international order. That the rules-based international order does not have answers to the problems that confront the world, and that the principal attribute of the current moment is great power rivalry. And so we are entering what looks to be a new geopolitical situation. I don't expect that President Trump will fall back on the language of democracy versus authoritarianism. I don't think that he will look to the United Nations for answers to the problems that the world faces. I don't think that he will feel particularly constrained by international rules and norms. I don't think that he will spend an inordinate amount of time worrying about the interests or concerns of allies and partners. When he says that he wants to put America first, I think he means it. And so my first main point is that I think that we're in a period of transition in the geopolitics right now. My second big point is that global leadership will likely be more contested on an issue-by-issue basis. For all of its flaws, the United States still has a commanding lead in overall national power in the international system. The United States remains the only country in the world that meets the classic definition of a superpower, which is the ability to exercise influence and project power in every region of the world. But even so, I don't expect that the world is going to divide into rival blocs like it did during the Cold War. Rather, I expect that most countries will want to hedge to try to get the best deal possible between the United States and China to play each side off of each other to advance and maximize its interest. And so there will be blurred boundaries rather than neat divisions of the world. And this leads to the third and final idea that I would just put on the table at the start of our conversation, which is that a consequence of all of this is that there may be less coordination amongst countries to deal with transnational challenges in the coming period. Outside of Europe, my sense is that the United Nations and other multilateral organizations are viewed rather warily. I think that most developed countries in the world, as we were just talking about, are facing fiscal constraints. When you listen to Dr. Rouse talk about the level of the deficit and debt in the United States, it's pretty sobering. I think that the United States is going to be unlikely to be a convener for major global initiatives, and that the developed world is unlikely to throw its support behind China to play such a role. So in short, these are the three ideas that I just wanted to start our conversations out with, which is that the world is entering a new geopolitical era. Leadership in this new era will be highly contested. There will not be neat divisions of rival blocs, and there may be less coordination on global challenges. And so the implication for Taiwan that I see sitting in Washington, D.C., is that I think it is important for Taiwan to continue making the case, as it does very effectively, that peace and stability here is a prerequisite for a functioning global economy and for stability in the most important region of the world. Every country that is connected to the global economy has a stake in what happens in Taiwan and in Taiwan's security. And I think that this practical framing will have much more purchase with partners around the world than any appeals to ideology might in this period. But I will stop there.
Well, I want to thank CIER and Brookings in inviting me over here. When I accepted the invitation, I thought my training had nothing to do with economic stuff. But thanks to Dr. Maloney's reference earlier, now we are in a period of, in an era of real politics as well as geoeconomics. You may use the term geoeconomics. Seems to me, right now, Taiwan is pretty much at the center of global geoeconomics. I'm not exaggerating about that. One thing is China has never given up its ambition toward Taiwan. And Taiwan happens to be the main producer of semiconductor. Only yesterday, it was rumored that the AIT director put pressure on UMC, Lianhua Dianzi, asking Lianhua, implicating that UMC should invest in the United States. And that is something that should concern Taiwan. We all know that TSMC's investment in Arizona has not been that smooth. The cost is high, and according to TSMC's estimate, 50% of its cost of investment in Arizona is because of lack of clustering. That is, in producing semiconductor chips, you have several stages. And Taiwan happens to have a cluster of various small and medium enterprises that supply TSMC. And for more Taiwan companies, electronics companies, to invest in the United States, that of course will enhance the economic security of the United States. But that also for Taiwan, that is also a risk of emptying out. We have seen that in the 90s when China opened up and Taiwan started to invest in China. But anyway, we are at Taiwan is at the crossroad of international politics as well as international economics. And my thinking is that's on the top of my mind. The second thing is the role of U.S. dollars. President-elect Trump has threatened to slap high tariffs to BRICS on BRICS countries if BRICS countries attempt to move the U.S. dollar from some other local currencies. And U.S. dollar, the strength of U.S. dollar has a lot to do with its running trade deficit with the rest of the world. And the U.S. could use the U.S. dollar as a choke point for geopolitical purpose. China is trying to alleviate, to lessen the U.S. dollar impact. My guess is right now the ultimate deterrence against China's possible invasion invasion of Taiwan is U.S. sanctions. If you look at how U.S. sanctioned Russia, you know that China would be very leery of all these kinds of sanctions. And China, the best for China is it can incorporate Taiwan, not necessarily by land invasion. There are some other means. If Taiwan came in at the same time, China would not incur the wrath of U.S. sanctions. That would be the best for China. And I also think that I'm quite concerned about the prospect that the United States, or should I say the Trump administration too, we know that Trump's presidency is very transactional. It's always give and take. I am concerned that U.S. China and the U.S. would work around Taiwan. I won't say selling out, but I say work around Taiwan, and to have some formula. And as long as TSMC or Taiwan's electronics industry can still be functioning. And at the same time, Taiwan, China can have Taiwan back in whatever form, and China won't incur any sanctions from the United States. Well, if you think hard enough, if you bargain hard enough, that is a possibility, and that concerns me. And I am trying to work along these lines, including my later answering to your questions.
Both for setting us off on such I think, a really compelling set of ideas and issues. And I want to take you each along the rest of our 45 minutes or so with a couple of questions individually and then some questions that I'll put to you jointly. Ryan, I wonder if you could just scan the horizon. You talked a little bit about the ideas that you think are animating the Trump administration. What is the reception to some of those ideas, both here in Asia, but also in other parts of the world?
Well, as I look around the world, I think that each region has its own reaction to the election of President Trump. I find the Europeans to be the most alarmed. It feels almost funereal to meet with European colleagues sometimes, like they're mourning the loss of something. I will defer to Suzanne, but my impression is that there is a certain sense of optimism that there may be possibilities for people in the Middle East to secure some of their interest with President Trump's return to office. I think that friends in Latin America are cautiously optimistic that the nomination of Marco Rubio as Secretary of State will mean that there is more attention placed upon Latin America after a period where the United States has invested its attention in the region. I think our friends in Africa are a bit concerned that they will be viewed through the prism of U.S.-China rivalry and little more. And that brings us to Asia. And my impression, but I welcome corrections from you all, is that there is neither romanticism about the Biden administration nor deep, profound alarm about the return of the Trump administration. That the business of Asia is business. And if President Trump succeeds at growing the regional economy, growing the United States economy, seeing the global economy grow, that there may be opportunities for productive work to be done between the United States and countries in the region.
Ryan, Dr. Ho, you talked a little bit about how you anticipate the Trump administration may approach Taiwan specifically. I wonder if you could look a little beyond Taiwan to the broader Indo-Pacific. How much of a focus do you expect it to be for the Trump administration? And where are the issues where you think this new American president may have the most impact across Asia?
Thank you for the question. Let me put it this way. We know that President-elect Trump would have a full plate in domestic politics. The deportation issue, tax reduction, as well as tariffs. And they are all very difficult issues. And then, of course, there is this wild card, Elon Musk. You don't know what kind of cutting would cause. Well, his intended cutting of the federal budget would incur governance problem. And then, of course, if, as Professor Rouse, president of Brookings, just mentioned that if you cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, you know that will be there will be political turmoil. And on top of that, as we are not even sure, the American government will not be shut down the day after tomorrow. And the chaos has already started. For those of you who are not that familiar with congressional politics, right now, the House is under Republican control. Speaker Mike Johnson wanted to pass a continuing resolution of the current budget that is called CR. And apparently he couldn't run up enough Republican votes for passing the CR. So he has to talk to across the aisle. That is, he needs the support of the Democrat House members. And of course, the Democratic House members would insert some good stuff that would be unpalatable to the Republican far-right members. And so Mike Johnson asked the help of Elon Musk and President Trump. And after several hours this morning in Taiwan time, both rejected Mike Johnson's request. That's why I'm saying right before the Christmas, the American government probably would shut down. So the chaos has already started, and we can expect more chaos in the next 4 years, just like Trump administration won. And if there is more chaos, I bet there will be more opportunities for the U.S. Adversary countries. The adversaries will take advantage of Trump's preoccupation with domestic politics, and that would be very detrimental to the peace and stability in East Asia. Please.
Well, if there's one thing that the United States and Taiwan share in common, it's that our legislatures are sort of messy. But in all seriousness, I very much agree with Dr. Ho's assessment. I think that it is unfortunate that the United States Congress appears to be on the verge of a shutdown as two people who are getting ready to go through the United States Customs in 48 hours. We're very aware of the implications of that for us on a personal basis, but even more so on a national level. I guess the one thing that I would say is that we have been through this before. The United States is a messy democracy that often takes 2 steps back and 2 steps forward and then 2 steps sideways. We went through the first Trump administration, which was very chaotic, and the United States remained the world's sole superpower. And part of the reason for that is that if you are only watching what's happening in Washington, you're missing what's happening in America. Because Washington, D.C. is where Suzanne and I live, but what really drives America forward is what happens outside of Washington, not necessarily what happens inside of it. And there's still incredible dynamism in our economy. There's still a highly functioning set of institutions, our free media, our judiciary, our independent military. And at the state and local level, there's still a very high functioning democratic system. And so, yes, the view from Congress is going to be ugly in both Taipei and Washington, but let's not get too distracted by that as a data point.
I feel encouraged, to say the least. And then in the Indo-Pacific area, of course, the center of attention is China. No question about that. It is the only country that can vie with the United States for global leadership. And Xi Jinping's China dream is very much based on his idea of global scenery. Ryan just mentioned that the rule-based international institutions probably will see a lot of debacles. And a lot of rules, a lot of set ideas would be thrown out of the window. And then that would give China even more opportunities to assert itself. That's my guess. As I can see that, Mark Rubio, the nominated, the nominee for the Secretary of State of President Trump, is very much anti-China. He himself is under individual sanction by China. But my guess is that China will look past that. And then Mike Waltz, the designated national security advisor, also harbors adverse feelings toward China. And then I'm not sure, I know Hexad, the nominee for the Secretary of Defense, wants to change the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War. So I think he is, I'm not sure if he's trigger happy, but look at his idea about the international politics. You'll know that he can be very anti-China as well. And on top of that, most recently, we have seen the article by Mitch McConnell. He is warning against his Republican members that the isolationism will do large damage to American interest. So my guess is based on human agencies, based on all these people that Trump will have them surround, take care of international policy. I think these people will pay close attention to China's stance. Yes, U.S. will still pay attention to China, but the thing is that if domestic politics will allow the government, yes, I know the U.S. is still functioning. It is not a failed country. There's no question about that. But the thing is, if the government's attention is toward inside rather than toward outside, then China will feel very happy about its exercising its influence across Indochina. That's my guess.
Both made comments that I think give me a sense of what the answer to my next question might be. But I'd love to hear you talk more about where you see the international system moving. Ryan, you talked about a situation in which global leadership is more contested, where there's no neat division among blocs. Dr. Ho, you talked about a more chaotic international system with more opportunities for adversaries of the United States and of the West. Do you see that this rules-based international order can be preserved? Do you anticipate greater multipolarity? Is it possible that we may see ourselves moving toward more of a bloc-like system that we've seen in the past? And what would that mean both for the United States and Taiwan?
Otherwise, no, you will take all my talk. Yes, I think international politics will have some very basic change. Well, in the best tradition of a scholar, I have to mention a classic book by Hadley Bull. I think many of political scientists have read before. It's a truly classic. And the title of that book is called Anarchical Society. That is, anarchy doesn't mean without order, no order. It does not it doesn't say there's no order in international politics. It only says that everyone for himself. And that is the essence of international relations. And in that case, there are four institutions or mechanisms that countries can form community. And that's a balance of power, international law, diplomacy, and war. Now, yes, war is also a mechanism in international politics. And the balance of power probably is gone. Ryan just mentioned that Trump is very, very likely to go with the principle of America first. And if he does that, he has already done that. he would turn on American allies first, look at Mexico, Canada, and some other countries. And the Western European countries, they, as you said, Western European leaders or decision makers are very concerned about the future of NATO now. And then if Trump has said that he may possibly withdraw from NATO now, if that is the case, then the basic idea of balance of power since the Second World War now is gone. And then I think European countries would have to be more assertive now. But if you look at the big three in Western Europe now, Germany, France, and Britain now, I don't think they are in good position, militarily or economically now, to assert their self-autonomy from the United States. Now, without the U.S. support, NATO is not that NATO at all. That's one thing. Now, we also know that Germany's economy and France is going down. France is not doing very well, and UK, well, it's better now on the Labour Party now, but still it is not recovering now from leaving the EU now. So if U.S. withdraws from NATO, that would be a problem. But fortunately, Russia is not doing very well. China's economy is going down. There is a war in Middle East that scares Iran, and then North Korea's troops in Ukraine are not performing very well. So we know that. I hate to use this term, but I think the world is committing some collective suicide. I mean, not all this the grape house are not functioning as they should, at least not functioning according to my American professors told me that they should function. So that's one thing. And then Dr. Maloney, you also mentioned in an earlier question round, and you also mentioned what kind of issues that would concern East Asian countries. Tariffs definitely is something. And then security alliance. If Trump can back off from NATO, then Biden's consolidating East Asian allies would be gone probably. After all, Asia is farther away from United States than Europe. So all these things, and then diplomacy will be everyone for itself, and there is no longer a rule-based international regime, and they are. I think we are in for something for the next 4 years.
Cheer us up a little bit.
Well, I didn't know that I would play the role of optimist today, but I will try. First, on the issue of NATO and America's involvement in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, I think it's worth remembering that Donald Trump is not Kim Jong-un. He is not an authoritarian with absolute control of his country. He is operating within a system of checks and balances, and my sense is that most members of Congress are supportive of America remaining involved in NATO. President Trump is actually an outlier in his views on this. And so I will wager that 4 years from now, the United States will remain in NATO. That's one piece of good news. On the bad news front, I do think that President Trump does have a lot of latitude to decide how much he involves himself in multilateral organizations. And I think that he will choose to involve himself very little in these organizations. They frustrate him. He doesn't like how slow they operate, how much consensus is required. And so I don't think that he will spend a lot of time worrying about wearing funny shirts at ASEAN summits or going to APEC summits or involving himself deeply in the G20 or G7, for example. He much prefers to operate one-on-one, leader-to-leader, and exercise maximum leverage to try to secure his goals. So that's, I would put in the bad news category. But I want to end, since I'm being an optimist today, on a good news front, which is that I don't think that it will be possible for countries to establish exclusive spheres of influence. As I look around the world, Russia's too weakened by events in Ukraine to establish dominance over its periphery. Asia is too integrated and too contested for China to establish a sphere of influence in the region. And at the same time, China is too deeply embedded in Latin America for the United States to establish an exclusive sphere of influence in the region. And so where does that leave us? I think that I end up in a very similar place to Dr. Ho. I think that we are going to be in a period of selfish pursuit of national interest, where outside of Europe, I think many countries will look out for themselves and their own interests, not for finding ways to contribute to tackling transnational challenges.
That idea of a selfish pursuit of national interest is perhaps a good segue to my next question, and really it is aimed at you both, but with a slightly different lens that I might ask you each to adopt in this. Just what advice might you give, Dr. Ho, to leaders here in Taiwan about how to approach the Trump administration and this changing world, more chaotic and more self-interested world that we may be moving into? And Ryan, if I could ask you to address the same issue, but really from the perspective of leaders in China.
Taiwan. First thing is, let's assume the Trump administration, Trump 2, is transactional. So we have to pay our dues in defending ourselves. And I'm afraid that for Taiwan, for the past several administration governments, we haven't done enough for that, including the DPP government as well as the KMT government. Our defense spending is only 2.1% of our GDP, far from being enough. Far from being enough. That's one thing. So we have to have to establish sufficient military deterrence against China. That's quite important. And one example being that the crew ratio of our jet fighters is only 1 to 1.33. That is, for every jet fighter, we have only 1.3 pilot to fly it. It would be very exacting on the pilots. That's why our pilots would be exhausted after accompanying the jet fighters from the other side. So this is far from being enough for having enough pilots. The training, the equipment should be improved. No question about that. If you look at Poland, after 2022 Russia invasion into Ukraine, Poland, I think, has increased its spending to 5% of the GDP. That's a lot. When you are a frontline country, you just have to establish enough military presence to provide the least amount of deterrence for your national security. That's one thing. And then second thing is, Trump, as I said, Trump's is quite transactional now. So Taiwan has to pay very close attention to any details that, as I mentioned earlier, that the U.S. and China would walk around Taiwan to reach some sort of agreement between the two to decide on Taiwan's future. That's important. And there is not that much we can do if the two great powers decide that. And that's my thinking. And of course, Ryan may say that, and of course, Taiwan can still be self-assertive, but I'm more in the tradition of media dialogue. And for that matter, media was a very small island caught between the rivalry between Athens and Sparta. So the Athens commander would tell the Median ambassador that, hey, look, why don't you align with us? And the Median ambassador said, okay, look, we are very small, please spare us, and no, we cannot offend you, neither can we offend Sparta. And the Athenian commander just told the Median king that in international politics, the strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. This is the kind of thing I learned from my studying in the United States. So we will be in a Taiwan would be in a very difficult position if the U.S. government works around Taiwan. So Taiwan would need Congress to balance off the executive branch initiative in doing that. So I think Congress would be extremely important for Taiwan's future. A third thing is Taiwan should also have some dialogues with China. That's important. I know that our current government doesn't want that, and China simply doesn't trust President Lai. But however, how difficult the situation really is, both sides should try their best to establish some kind of dialogue. That is important. Without enough dialogue across the Taiwan Strait, then any incident can turn into a huge event that would embroil the United States. And then if that is the case, the U.S. would feel, my guess is, oh, come on, there you go again. We just cut a deal with China so that you won't be another prod in our relations with China. That's my guess. But of course, the U.S. still has a good feeling toward Taiwan. And the thing is, Taiwan must not waste the good feeling by the United States.
I like where you ended. Taiwan has enormous support in the United States. Has enormous public support, has enormous support throughout Congress. I can't speak for what President Trump will or won't do. I don't know. But I think that his space to make some grand deal that implicates the future of Taiwan is very limited because of the system within which he operates. And so I hope that we don't have to dust off our Athenian history to understand the next steps in the fate of Taiwan, and I'm confident that we won't. On the question that Suzanne posed about how will China approach the Trump administration, what I sense from listening to Chinese counterparts is that their topmost focus right now is on reviving their economic machine. That they are struggling. They're trying to pull out of a deflationary spiral. And their primary focus right now is on Chinese-style economic modernization. And if you accept that as an assumption, then it would suggest that China would prefer to have stabilized relations with the United States so that they can focus on their more immediate challenges with their economy. And if that is the case, then what will the Chinese do? I think that what they will do at a tactical level is try to position themselves as critical to the issues that President Trump is trying to solve. So whether it is Ukraine or the situation in the Middle East or the situation on North Korea or the flow of fentanyl into the United States, they will try to position themselves as the indispensable partner to try to solve these problems. And then at a more strategic level, I think what they will try to do is a strategy of hedging on one hand, balancing on the other, and defending, and engaging with President Trump. They will not turn down opportunities to speak directly with President Trump, but they will hedge by trying to diversify trade and investment flows away from the United States so that they're less dependent upon the United States and more integrated with the rest of the world, particularly the developing world.
A few moments left for this panel before we welcome another wonderful discussion among experts. But I did want to turn to one final issue and perhaps get brief answers from each of you. We've referenced over the course of this conversation on multiple occasions various aspects related to Russia and to Europe. And obviously we know that the war in Ukraine is going to be a very important issue and perhaps a signal of where the Trump administration may be going in terms of its relationships with the great powers and in terms of its approach to difficult conflicts. What do you think may happen? And more importantly, what are the lessons that Taiwan and Asia as a whole should take from what we expect to transpire with respect to the war in Ukraine?
Since the start of Russian invasion into Ukraine, I had paid very close attention to the situation over there. And most recently, I found that for those people surrounding Trump, they used to have a lot of negative talk about Ukraine. It's corrupt, and it's in a no-win situation. It should give up. It should make concessions, territorial concessions to Russia, so as to achieve some ceasefire. But most recently, because of the collapse of Syrian government, talking about the linkage politics in international scene, Russia apparently is in a much weakened position. And then the negative talk of people, by people who surround Trump in this regard, started dwindling. So my guess, Trump said that within 24 hours he could solve the whole situation. I'm not sure about that. But my thinking is if Trump's solution is based on sheer stoppage or sheer sellout, that is stopping any military and financial assistance to Ukraine, then China would learn that Trump is not serious about Taiwan. And that is my worry. But on the other hand, if Trump is backing Ukraine to have some agreeable formula for both sides to achieve ceasefire, then the situation would be much better. I think right now the crux is if Western European countries can stand up, support Ukraine, even if the United States does not support Ukraine. That is very important. And that tells us, tells the Axis countries that allies are important. And that would tell Taiwan we should, even though we are not recognized by the main countries, we can still have allies in cross-strait competition.
Dr. Ho mentioned Syria, and we're with one of America's foremost Middle East experts. I know we're very limited on time, so I'd like to cede my time to ask if Suzanne would be willing to share a thought on where the Middle East is going.
Well, thank you, Ryan. We literally have only seconds left on our panel, so I will be exceptionally brief. I think that one of the takeaways that you both have spoken about is President Trump's disdain for partnerships and allies, but also his disinterest in seeing the United States get drawn into another conflict in the Middle East. And I think that that will be his overriding priority with respect to the conflicts that we have seen raging and how he manages the very, I think, significant and ongoing challenge that he will continue to face from Iran, which remains weaker today than ever before, but closer to nuclear weapons capability than at any time in its history. So thank you for the opportunity to speak briefly to that, and more importantly, thank you to both of you for the very important remarks that you've made and the perspective that you've shared with us all on global geopolitics and Taiwan's role in that. Thank you very much. Please join me in a round of applause for these speakers.
Thank you. We would like to thank Vice President Maloney for hosting this session, and also we would like to thank Director Hess and Professor He for delivering great conversation, very fruitful insights. Thank you. So please give them a big applause again. Thank you.